Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Bytesize Talk. With us today is Nicolas Vannieuwkerke from the for Medical Genetics in Ghent. And he is going to tell us what to do with JSON files when you want to use them in sample sheets, for example, in Nextflow. So off to you.
Okay, thank you for the nice introduction. I'm Nicolas, and we'll be going over how to create JSON schemas for sample sheets using the NF-schema plugin. You can follow along if you want by going to this link and either open it in Gitbot or downloading it on your own system and running along with me on how we write the JSON schema. So I'll give everyone a little bit of time to get this sorted. In the meantime, I'll switch my screen. Okay. So if you open or download the repository, you should see something like this, with a file samplesheet.csv and a schema input.json file in it, these two files. To run this, we will just use a simple Nextflow script. Oh, seems like the language server is complaining. We will just use a simple main.nf script, which takes the input file and the schema file and converts it to a list using nf schema. So let's put this back. So as you can see in the schema, in the sample sheet here, there are a lot of things that are wrong with the sample sheet. Like the samples aren't, the sample IDs aren't correctly parsed. There's a space in here. This is an integer. This one is not even filled in. And a lot of other different difficulties, like the VCF is wrongly spelled here. This is not actually a VCF file, it's just a directory, for example. And we want to validate for those errors so that the pipeline actually fails before it really tries to use these files. So for that, we will use a schema like this file. I already made a little template like this. I will go over the keywords in a minute. This template basically just can be used by everyone to create a sample sheet schema. So it has the schema keyword, which tells NF schema which draft to use. Currently only draft 2012 is supported, so I advise you to use this one, of course. We have no plans at the moment to support more drafts than this one, so please just use this one. Then you have the ID, which is basically the URL to the schema file inside of GitHub or some other repository service. You can see it's the URL to the GitHub repository I showed earlier. Then the title of the schema, you can give it a title, whatever title you want. The description of the schema, so which kinds of sample sheets does it actually validate? So in this description, I will say it's just a schema for the sample sheet used in this pipeline. So then I say type array, items, type object, and properties. This is, I think, the most difficult thing about JSON schemas, but I'll try to explain it hopefully well enough so everyone will understand it. So type array, we say that the sample sheet is actually an array of different objects. So the array means each row consists of a single entry in the list of entries in the sample sheet. And then we say that each item consists of an object with properties. This is actually a dictionary from Python, for example. It has keys and values. So for example, sample is sample1, VCF is the data / sample1.vcf.gz, and so on. In this, we can define keywords and validate the specific keywords in the sample sheet. So if we run it for now, without any keywords, let's actually run main.nf. Let's wait a bit. You will see that it will complain that it does not recognize any of the headers in here in the sample sheet, so the sample, VCF, TBI, and it does not output anything because it didn't find any recognized keywords. So for this, we will add the keywords to it. So we will add sample to the first one, VCF, TBI. Don't worry about the curly brackets for now. We also have data type and human in here. data type basically tells us what the type of data is, so DNA or RNA, and human tells us whether the data is human or not. So if we run it again, like this, we should see that it actually starts outputting the content of the sample sheet, as you can see here. But nothing gets validated yet. So it passes everything and it says, oh, this is all fine. So we don't want that. So let's start with the sample column first. So we want to tell in a schema that sample is actually of the type string. This will immediately start failing with the number 3 here, of course. So let's see what it does. As you can see here, error failed. Sample in entry 3, value is integer but should be string. Of course, there are instances, and a lot of instances in NF core pipelines, where you actually want to allow integers as valid IDs for your sample. You can do this by adding a list of types in which you also specify integer. This way, the integers also get validated as correct sample IDs. Then we also want to make sure that there are no spaces inside of our sample. So we want to use a regex pattern, which starts and ends with non-byte space characters, which this means. I'm not going to go in depth on the regex right now, because that's probably could use another byte size entirely on how to write these proper things. But this basically means that it needs to be a value without any spaces inside of it. So let's see if this validates the second sample here. As you can see, yes, sample 2 does not match the regular expression. So it means that there is actually space in there. This is not that descriptive to your users, of course. So you want to maybe add a custom error message in this case, which tells the users, oh, okay, so sample needs to be a string or integer and cannot contain spaces. So let's run this again. I know it will also say, show this specific error message to the users, so this can help your users to actually detect the problem if they're not that familiar with regex patterns. So let's fix this issue, remove the space from sample 2. And then we also want to check, of course, if the sample is not filled in, then it will also give some weird errors to your pipelines. So we want to make sure that every sample column is filled in. So we'll make this a required key of the dictionary. So we want to set this property to the same level as the object type, because we want to validate an actual key and not the values of a key. So we want to say required here. Oh, it needs to be a list. So you can also give more than one key in this required list. This will check if all the values of these keys have been filled in at this point. So this will also fail for entry 4, and we'll say that it needs to have a value. So missing required fields sample. And I also forgot to save for sample 2. So let's fill this in with sample 4. Then we also want to check for duplicates, of course, because sample 1 is in here. Sample 1 is also in here. So we don't want to mix the data together or have some duplicates in our samples. So we actually just want the pipeline to fail if the same sample has been given more than once. So we have to do this on an array level. So we need to go back to the array level here and actually tell it that it needs to check for that specific key, so sample, and tell it that it needs to be unique. So for this, we will use the unique entries keyword. This is something specific to NF schema, so not to the JSON schema specs itself, which will give it a list of keys that it needs to check for uniqueness. So it will actually check the value of the sample keys, of the sample key, and see if something gets duplicated, which is the case in this case, and we'll see what it says. Detect duplicate entries sample 1 in entry 5. It says to us. So we will just remove sample 5. So everything is looking fine now for the sample column. So let's go to the VCF one. So for this, we want to double check that the file is actually a file, that it exists, and that it has the correct extension. So for this, we will also start with telling it that it needs to be type string, but with a specific format. Format is a specific keyword that you need to give, that you can give to a string type keyword. So we'll say that it needs to be a file path. Of course, we will also check if it exists. And then we will also use pattern again to check the extension. So we'll use the same one. We will check the whole string using this. Then we will tell it that it needs to be, it can be every character except for white spaces. And it needs to end in .vcf.gz. So this will give us a couple of failures. Let's see. So first of all, entry 5. Oh, I forgot to save again. Entry 3, error fulfilled VCF. This does not match the regular expression VCF.gz. That's correct because it has two C's. So let's fix this. Then the file or directory does not exist, probably because it has the wrong extension. This does not match regular expression and it does not exist. So that's also an issue. We want to, of course, use a VCF for this. So let's change this to sample4.vcf.gz. Save this time and run it again. Okay, so sample4 does not exist. We will create this one in this case. Data/sample4.vcf.gz. And run it again. And then we should start seeing that NF schema actually converts these strings to actual file objects in Nextflow like this. Instead of just having the relative string here, it has the full string here, which means that NF schema has actually converted these string values to a full file object, which you can use inside of your workflow. So, okay, we want to do the same thing for the index of the VCF, of course. So we'll just copy over this code, add it to this, and update the index here. And with TBI. But you see some issues like this. It has an index, but it does not have a VCF. That's weird behavior, of course, because if you have VCF, you would expect it to be an index, but if you have an index, you would expect there to be a VCF. So we can actually check this too using a new keyword called dependent required, which will also check if this key has been given, then you need to also supply these keys. So for this, in this example, if TBI has been filled in, you also need to supply the VCF. So we will add this here. So it's like this. The syntax is a bit weird sometimes, but it should be pretty easy to implement. So it's the curly brackets in which you specify a keyword it needs to check. So TBI in this case. And then you specify a list of keywords it needs to check if they exist, if that first keyword also exists. So VCF. This should also start giving us an error in this case. Object does not have some of the required properties VCF in this case for entry 2, which is correct. So we will add the sample2 VCF.gz here. Okay, so that's the first 3 keywords done. Let's do the last ones. So data type is actually also a type string value, but it can only contain 2 possible values. So we'll give it an enum to tell it that it can only check for 2 possible values called DNA or RNA, which will fail in this case because we have DNA and RNA in this case. These empty values will not get validated in this case unless it is required. Let's run it to see what it does. So error fulfilled data type, DNA is the actual value in that type, in that field at that point. It needs to be DNA or RNA, and it is DNA. So let's fix this. And we also forgot to save again for the other error. Okay, so we also maybe want to default this to DNA, for example, to always have a value filled in for this specific field, even if it's empty. So let's see what this does. So as you can see, we have the sample one as the first value. This is the first column here. VCF has the full string to the VCF. TBI has full string to the TBI. And then we have DNA and an empty column, which is the human one we still need to fix at this point. As you can see in the two columns, it's 3 and sample 4, there's also DNA in here, which the schema tells NF schema to fill in by default. Okay, so for the last keyword, we have human, which we will make a Boolean type. So let's use Boolean. And we will give it a default of true in this case. So this will check if every value of this is actually a Boolean, which these two are, this one is not, and this one is not filled in. So it will give us an error for negative in this case, because it does not recognize negative and positive as Boolean values. You can see negative is a value of string, but should be Boolean. If we change this or simply delete this, we should start seeing true in the first 3 columns and false in the last one. Let's save it. There we go. True, true, and false. So I think these are the most common things you can encounter in sample sheets creation. There are, of course, a lot of other things you can do. You can start using any of, all of, one of, which I have not shown in this example. I can maybe do it in another bite size or during the questions in a moment. But these are the most common keywords that can be used across the whole sample sheet creation process to validate the most common cases which I've shown in this example. So that's it. I hope it was pretty clear. We'll see from the questions how clear it was. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you happen to have somewhere a link to the manual where you can see all the operators?
Yeah, the most of these keywords are actually the standard JSON schema keywords. So after this bite size, maybe I'll just post the links to those inside of the bite size channel. And you can just have a read through the whole JSON schema documentation, which is very well explained. I also maybe link the NF schema documentation where we specify the new keywords we added in NF schema itself. And I think that should be fine at the start. You can always post your question in the NF schema channel too if you encounter any problems using the JSON schemas for sample sheets or parameters.
Perfect. We actually already have a question in the chat. It has nothing to do with the schema, but someone is interested in your CSV extension that you're using. So
I actually don't know the name by heart, but I was looking up some CSV extensions in VS Code. So if I just CSV, oh, it was there already. So this one is CSV to table. You can just install it, and then it will show you an edit CSV button at the top of CSV, TSV, or the other file format, PSV file here. And you can click it, and it will open a table format for your CSV file. I think it's easier to show in examples like this using such a table.
yeah.
Okay.
I have also allowed everyone now to unmute themselves. So Jonas, you asked the question. If you want, you can ask it in person as well.
Yeah, sure. I was just wondering if it's possible to have also optional columns in the sample sheet and
Yeah.
parsing them.
Yeah, every column we supplied here, except for sample, is actually an optional column in this case, because we have only set to NF schema that the sample column is required. All other columns could be removed in this case, so maybe I'll just remove this for now. Have this removed and this. I will run it, and you should see that it will just create an entry containing only sample 1 and the defaults for every other column, which is an empty list for the files, DNA because we said it should be DNA as default, and true because we said it should be true as default.
Great, cool, thank you.
No problem.
Are there any more questions from the audience? I have one more. Where exactly is your schema input.json located in the repo?
In this repo, it's just located inside in the root, but in of course, pipelines, it's usually in the assets folder. But you need to supply the path to the schema inside of the sample sheet to list function, which I did here. So I had schema and I supplied it the file object of the schema.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Last chance for anyone to ask a question. Otherwise, I thank you, Nicolas, for a really interesting talk. And I
Thank
thank
you.
the audience for joining us today. And I hope you'll join us also for the next Bite Size. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.